This podcast is not meant to be professional advice of any kind. It is meant to be informative and entertaining. If you make any changes to your life, see the appropriate professional before you do so. Welcome to Super Age. My name's David Stewart. I am the founder of Ageist and your host on the Super Age Show. We talk about how to live healthier, how to live longer, and how to be happier. And who doesn't want that? Today's show is brought to you by Inside Tracker, the dashboard to your inner health. Go to insidetracker.com/ageist, save 20% on all their products. Today's show is also brought to you by SRW. Aging is inevitable, but how we age is chiefly a matter of our choices. If you go to srw.co, you can save 20% on all their products by using the code AGEIST20 at checkout. Welcome to episode 125 of the Super Age Podcast. It is great to have you with us. This will be dropping on March the 15th, 2023. Today we're coming to you from the snowy, very, very snowy mountains of Utah, where it is once again snowing. It's astonishing. I don't even know what to say about this winter. Some of the ski resorts, it's like 500, 600, 700 inches of snow. It's a lot of snow, which makes the mountains beautiful. But, it seems like spring is about to be sprung. We're seeing the birds again and the animals are sort of coming out. And if you're an animal and you've like hibernated this long and you go out and you're like, oh my God, there's 7 feet of snow in front of my burrow. Yeah. But spring will be here soon, and I think things are going to get pretty sloppy here for a while. Tonight, which will probably be after this podcast drops, we're doing a small ageist event here in Park City, Utah. So, 50, 80 people. We'll see who shows up. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we talk here about on the Super Age Podcast. And it's really an opportunity to just meet people and get some of the disparate communities here together because, being in a town like this, people tend to stay siloed within their interests or sports or, whatever it is they're doing. And we have an opportunity tonight to sort of pull people together and say like, hey, here's this interesting person and they're doing whatever. So that's going to be really fun tonight. We haven't done an event since pre-COVID. Oh my gosh. I think a lot of my fellow masters ski race folks are going to be there. And it's an opportunity to see like what people look like. The thing about skiing is, and I think it's one of the reasons famous people like skiing, like, Madonna, Brad Pitt, people like that, they love to ski because you're entirely covered up. You're like in this costume. And like, there's no way I would recognize people that I'm with 5 days a week for 3 months out on the streets. So we get to see what everybody looks like, and this is going to be really fun. I'm very much looking forward to it. Today on the show, we are honored to have Andrew Scott. And Andrew Scott is a professor of economics at Oxford and London School of Business. He's written a number of books on, sort of the economic implications of age, one of which is called The 100-Year Life, which he wrote together with Linda Grattan, and it sold over 1 million copies. I've read this book. It is a fantastic guide, really, to how to, what's going to happen with a 100-year life. And for you personally, if you're going to live to 100 years, how should you be thinking about your future? And there's some wonderful stuff in there about asset classes. And this is one of the main reasons I want to have Andrew on today, because people think of asset classes of like, how much is your house worth? How much cash you got in the bank? But there's a whole other grouping of asset classes that they point out in this book, your health, your network, your skills, all these other things that we really need to be thinking about if we're going to live a long time. So we're going to get with Andrew Scott in just a moment after a quick word from our sponsor. Today's show is brought to you by SRW Laboratories. Out of New Zealand, their vision is to extend human health span. SRW Labs curates the very latest in science and research to formulate premium nutraceuticals that support your cellular health, especially as you age. Working with their scientific advisory board, they seek to understand and address the causes of aging at a cellular level, providing support across 12 bodily systems with an approach that is unique to SRW. They know that doing one thing well, such as eating healthily, won't have the desired effect on your health. This is why SRW seeks to educate people on the factors that influence aging and, more importantly, biological age. Use the code AGEIST20 at checkout and save 20% off any order. Go to srw.co, not .com. Use the code AGEIST20 at checkout, save 20% on all their products. Today's show is also brought to you by Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is the dashboard to your inner health. You know, we talk about this a lot, about metrics, what matters, biomarkers. The thing is, you can't take actions on things that you don't know about, and what you don't know about can hurt you. I use Inside Tracker. I take their ultimate test 4 times a year. I look at their biomarkers. I see what's moving from quarter to quarter, so I can see if I've made changes in my program and my diet. Is there something that I need to adjust? And their food first, supplement second recommendations are great. I always share the results with my doctor, and if there's something we need to go over, we do that. Go to insidetracker.com/ageist. Save 20% on all their products. Andrew, I am so excited to have you on the show today. A very impressive book that I just finished reading, The 100-Year Life, that you wrote with Linda Grattan. And there's so many things to talk about here. We could talk for days.
Yeah, one of the ironies of writing about longer lives is you always run out of time in talking about it. It's quite funny.
Well, I guess there's always more time to talk. So I wanted to ask you, your expertise is economics. And there are a lot of implications. Let's first talk about health span, lifespan, and economics. Assuming health spans and lifespans do not improve, what happens?
Well, we've got a problem. So, I mean, it's funny, as an economist coming into this topic, I came into it because since undergraduate days, which is more than 30 years ago now, I've been writing about an aging society. And economics sees this as a problem. And an aging society basically is there's fewer people being born, more people living for longer. And that's a problem because old people need a pension, they get ill, they get sick, and they're just kind of a burden, basically. And so if you've got more of older, those type of people, then you've got an economic problem. And so it's invariably negative. And for me, the real challenge there is that it's very much focused on a demographic story, which is a change in the age structure of society. But of course, what we need to do is to change how we age. We need to age better. So rather than focus on, oh, there's more old people, I think we need to focus on, actually, given the phenomenal increases in life expectancy that have happened, we need to change how we age. We haven't really expected to reach into those older ages in the past. Of course, there's always been old people, but it's been a minority living to 80 or 90. But if you look at the data today in most rich countries, it's the majority who will be living to 80 or 90. So we need to age better and behave differently. And of course, if we living longer and we can be healthier for longer and we can be productive for longer, can be engaged for longer, that's a really good news story. And that was kind of where I got to in a lecture I'd give about this aging society. I think the second or third time I was giving it to London Business School, there's a chart right in the middle that just says we're living longer and on average we're healthier for longer. And you think, how can this be a bad news story? It's surely a good news story. And that was kind of the moment where I suddenly thought, we're not focusing on how to change how we age.
Right. I think, bad news sells. So where the media is invariably focused on Social Security system in America will collapse. These pension systems will collapse. But I think I had Dr. Mike Roizen on. I've had him on a couple of times. He's head of wellness at the Cleveland Clinic. And they've published some data where they think there's an 80% chance that for current 55-year-old, the average life expectancy will be 115. Yeah. And these are sane, sober science people. They're not kooks. And when I tell people this, they just sort of look at me like, I was promised a flying car too. I don't have that. But I mean, this seems pretty real to me.
Well, who knows? I mean, this is where we get this huge debate about how long can we live for, etc. But
Hmm.
I certainly don't think we've reached a limit in terms of average life expectancy. And of course, one of the problems both in the US and the UK, where I live, is that actually life expectancy trends are stalling, not for
Hmm.
everyone. And actually, they're slipping behind other countries. So certainly, there's scope for the US and UK to do better because we are below other countries. But certainly, if you look at higher income people, life expectancy continues to increase. And I think I never quite know what to sort of to do about those projections because we don't know. But
Hmm.
clearly, for me, we're not even got the right practices for how long we can currently expect to
Hmm.
live, let alone how long we might live for. So there's an awful lot of change that we need to do in order to succeed. And I think, you're going back to what about bad news sells. One of the challenges I find in this is I've got the bad news story of too many old people and, everyone on walkers and dementia and care homes, etc. There's very few positive stories. Or we switch to stories about, oh, I don't want to live forever. And I find that sort of a rather strange way of coping with what is a new reality of, the young and the middle age have never been so likely to experience old age. So how we shift the agenda, I think the root cause of all of this and where the negativity comes from is that, societies and as individuals, I think we underestimate the capacity of later years. And if you do that, first of all, you get ageism. So you have things like the old age dependency ratio, which is this notion that everyone over 65 is dependent and ill and doesn't provide anything, which is clearly a version of ageism. Or as individuals, we sort of worry about getting old, which is interesting because, of course, we know from study after study that the worst time in terms of lifetime happiness is middle age rather than old age. But if we do underestimate our capacity in later years, we don't invest enough in our future. And I think at the heart of all this negativity is a notion that how we age is fixed. And I always say that really to understand life expectancy trends, there's two things you've got to try and understand. The first, and this is as an economist, it's about time. And you've got more time ahead of you. Whether you're 20, 50, or 80, you have more time ahead of you than past 20-year-olds, 50-year-olds, or 80-year-olds. So you have to invest more in your future. You just got a greater incentive to do it. And of course, if you invest more in your future in terms of your health, your finances, your skills, your relationships, you're likely to have a better future. You can't guarantee everything, but you're likely to do it. And we've never had such a high incentive to do it. The second thing is that it's about malleability. We can change how we age. Now, there may be limits to that process. Or if you look at the breakthroughs that are happening in sort of the biology of aging, you may say there's no limits. We can live to be 500, 600, who knows? But we know that how we age is malleable. We have friends that, exercise well, eat well, sleep well, have good relationships, and they just age better. We know in the UK and the US that there are enormous differences in life expectancy between those with high income and those with low income. So put those two things together. Longevity is about having more time, and age is malleable. And you've got I think, the start of a positive agenda rather than a negative story. But we are so wedded to measuring age in chronological terms that we miss these opportunities because, of course, chronological age has two problems. One is it's backward looking. I'm 57, by the way. So chronological age, I've got 57 years gone. But probably the most relevant number to me is not how many years I've had, but how many years I've got to go. And so, the average Brit has never been so old, but never had so long left to live. I'm not sure I call that unambiguously an aging society. And the older I get, the more vehemently I say that. But, with more years ahead, in some sense, I'm kind of younger. It would be the sort of the cute way of saying it. And of course, the other problem with chronological age is it's not malleable. It's fixed. It's 12 months every year. But what we really care about is our biological age. So I say we're slightly obsessed with chronological age, but we should be more interested in what's called prospective age, years to come, and biological age, how malleable we are. And I say once you grab hold of that, I think you see this topic very differently.
I read this fantastic statistic the other day, and I agree entirely with what you're saying. Really, how we age is entirely behavioral based, and we there's that often statistic people quote: 80% of our health outcomes are behavioral, 20% is genetics. I think it's higher than that. I read a statistic that identical twins, same genetic material, The average delta in mortality statistics is 10 years.
Wow.
10 years. Same
Yeah.
genetic material.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that 2080 quote. I have to say, it's such a valuable statistic. I think a lot of weight is borne by it. And I'm not quite sure how true it is. But of course, it's 20% genetic and 80% behavior and environment. So it's a mixture, that's obviously if you've got resources, you can do something about behavior, but the environment also matters a great deal. But totally, that then shows you just how malleable things are. And in the next book, which I'm just literally finishing off right now, I sort of have this sort of three-part argument. The first is, given the probabilities, the young and middle-aged have never been so likely to become very old. And then we talk to people about becoming old or, very old, living to 90s, 100 or 115. People are worried. They worry about outliving their health, their money, their purpose, their relationships. And if you put those two things together, you'd never be more likely to be old and you worry about getting old, then the key question is, well, what are you going to do today to do something to make sure you get good, not bad outcomes? And that comes back entirely to your 80-20 number and the malleability of age, because, when it was a minority outcome becoming old, you didn't have to worry so much about it, but you do now. And, how do I make the most of that extra time by investing in it?
I think that we're already seeing, when you're talking about malleability, I'm thinking about malleability also of, we would think of life phases. And I think of sort of human lifespan as a slinky. And what's happening is we're pulling the slinky out. And, as you point out in the book, people in their 20s now are living, in a different way than we did in our 20s. And I'm convinced it's because of their awareness of the age slinky being pulled apart.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought of the slinky metaphor, but it's a nice one. Although I think the slinky is also getting a bit twisted in different ways, but that's
true,
we're getting to do new tricks as well. Now, so as you've mentioned, the book 100-Year Life, written in 2016, and it's it's been a sort of a breakout success. I think we're closing in on 1 million copies sold globally now, which is wonderful. And I certainly didn't expect that to happen. And I think it's interesting too, because the sales are sort of pretty constant, if not picking up, because this is a theme that's just getting stronger and stronger. And we are seeing changes happening. And one of the there are lots of motivations for writing the book. One was feeling in that lecture that something was being missed in the aging society story. We weren't looking at the positives and the opportunities. But the other thing was also just looking at my kids who are behaving very differently. And in particular, my middle son, Louis, was just graduating then at 21. And he said, Dad, I'm not going to get a job next year. And I was pretty upset about that. I'm not normally cross with my children. Not in a sort of major way. It took me a while to work it out. And I suddenly realized, well, of course, he's behaving differently because he's got this opportunity that people now call emerging adulthood. And, that having more time, I think, is the key to understanding longevity, because, the statistic I often use is that there's a thing called best practice life expectancy. And that's where the phrase the 100-year life is kind of inspired by. And best practice life expectancy is the country at any point in time which has the highest average life expectancy. So today that's Japan. But of course, which country it is has changed over time. Sometimes it was Germany, sometimes Norway. And if you plot this best practice life expectancy over 150 years, it's increased by around 2 or 3 years every decade, which is an extraordinary statistic. Now, whether it can carry on at that rate, whether it slows down, much debate and fight. But if you step back and say, okay, what that means is, every 10 years, life expectancy is increased by 2 or 3. Every generation is living 6 to 9 years longer than the previous one, 12 to 18 years longer than your grandparents. But sometimes I say that in class and I kind of don't get the response I want. So I say, it's like your day going from 24 to 32 hours. That's what it's like if every 10 years life expectancy goes up by 2 or 3. And if your day went from 24 to 32 hours, you would live your day differently. Now, when I say to people, what would you do? They always say, oh, I'd sleep. And I get that. But I say, well, when? Would you just 8 hours at the end of the day? It'd be a bit of a boring way of spending it. For me, I'd get up earlier. I'd go to bed later, have a lovely sleep in the middle of the day. I'd probably have 5 small meals rather than 3 meals. 3 of them would still be called breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but they would change their timing, and therefore I would restructure the day. And that is, I think, what we're seeing. But what we're seeing also a lot of is governments trying to preserve what we call in the book the 3-stage life of education, work, retirement. And that, of course, was invented in the 20th century. It's so interesting that we invented so many new aspects of time in the 20th century. We invented the weekend, for instance. It didn't used to exist before the 20th century. We invented teenagers. My father was born in 1925. Although, of course, he was 13 and 14. He was never really a teenager. He was at work at 14. So we also invented retirement and pensioners. And what you're seeing governments around the world doing is try sort of just saying, oh my gosh, these long lives, they're causing a problem financially for us. We can't afford these pensions. Let's just raise the retirement age. But if that's all you do, if you stretch out that 3-stage life, I think it becomes quite unappealing. Because if you're living to 100, which is not implausible given the projections you made and we extend, then you're probably working to about 80 this 3-stage life. And working nonstop from 20 to 80 in the same way, that sounds like a missed opportunity to me. So I think, it's another reason we get a little bit negative, because we're focusing on the finances without thinking about the other ways of making us this longer life sensible.
Let's stay with the finances for a second, because we have all this talk of, future governmental bankruptcy and generally the conservative parts of whatever government, they want to cut back on certain things and, whatever, we'll leave that to them. But what are say we added working, I'll just pick a number, like 2 years. So we move from 65 to 67, something like that. What are going to be the effects on governmental finances? Because they're going to be collecting taxes on that money. That would seem to be a plus for them.
Yeah. So let me give you a quick answer, but let me give you the academic caveat, which is that's a really good question to ask, but I'm not sure anyone's got a very good answer. It's just why I'm trying to get to a good answer in my academic research. But in general, what the best I've seen effort trying to answer this says that every 1 year more of working by raising the retirement age generates about another 1% of GDP every year forever.
Whoa.
So that's quite
huge.
a big effect. Yeah, it's a big effect.
God.
And yeah, exactly. And, I would certainly, treat it with a slight pinch of salt, that number. But I think that's the magnitude we should be looking at.
Wow.
Now, my challenge with that, I think, is that one of the problems we've got with governments right now is they're all just raising the state pension age. But if you look at the labour market, people start to leave work from age 50. And very rarely is that a choice. So for me, the bigger challenge we've got is how do we keep people working from 50 to the state pension age? And if all we do is keep raising the state pension age, we don't actually keep people employable and productive for longer. So there's lots to be done around health and education, I think, to realize that. But this is what I and others call the economic longevity dividend. If we can make these extra years healthy and productive, not only are they good for us as individuals, they're great for the economy. Because the challenge you've got with a longer life is how to finance it. And whether you're the individual or the government, there's actually only 3 solutions. The first is you work for longer. The second is you save more, which the government is sort of taxing more. Or the third is you kind of invest in risky stuff and hope that it gets a higher rate of return. But if you go through all of those 3 options, it's pretty obvious that the main thing we have to do is work for longer. And, I wish I could give you a better answer, but I can't. That's sort of the way that it does. The good news is for every extra 1 year of life expectancy, you don't have to work the whole extra year. So we do gain some time as well. But we've really got to focus on that. And that's how we create these additional resources. And it's a really powerful lever. And of course, the more healthy we are, the longer we can work for. So, it's a really powerful lever. And if you think about governments around the world, we take for granted that if you invest in the health and education of young people, it's good for economic growth. But somehow there's this big resistance to the notion that investing in health and education of older people is good for the economy. Go figure.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about how it seemingly, out in the world of media or government or any of that, anyone over 40 is a liability and not an asset. And I just get over that.
No, it's just it goes to this point of just as a society, and I think US are particularly bad at it, underestimating the capacity of older people.
I think one of the things, taking out this idea of, and I've talked to a lot of HR people And what we're seeing now is retention is the big thing. You know, retention of skilled workers and that knowledge base, either institutional knowledge base or specific knowledge base, people want to retain. You know, the company needs to retain that, and people, you know, we're seeing this idea of sort of phased retirement. Maybe you only want to work 3 days a week, but this could go on for, you know, as you said, this sort of health underpins all of this. And assuming one is healthy, a lot of people really love what they do, and they want to keep doing it. And, you know, there's this idea of that changes consumption patterns too. So we're going to be seeing, I think, not just added taxation benefits for the government, but like overall economic benefits. I mean, if you're talking about a 1% increase in GDP, I can't think of anything else that would push the needle like that.
No, I mean, completely. No, I mean, look at they looked at employment trends. And so what you're seeing in the high income countries is a slowdown in productivity growth. So despite all these wonderful things about AI and tech, output per worker is really not growing very much. It's slowing down. So that more and more of economic growth comes from just employing more people. And if you look at the 10 years before COVID, in America, 3/4 of employment growth came from people aged over 55. In Europe, it was more than 100%. So the main driver of economic growth has been employment of older people. Now, we've got to unpick that a little bit because there's two things happening. One is, you know, I said we're living for longer and so we're working for longer. So people at older ages are more likely to work. But then, of course, and particularly in America, there's the baby boomer generation, this really big cohort that are coming into older ages. But put those two together, and older people are the main source of growth, which then, of course, raises the problem. What happens if they start to come up to retirement? And how we help people work for longer is key. And in the way I see it, I said earlier about that 3-stage life, we can't just stretch it out. I think careers become multi-staged. So there will be times in your life when you're really focused on making money, working full time. Other points where you might want a different work-life balance. Sometimes you might be salaried. Sometimes you might be freelance. It may be you're doing social entrepreneurship, but you also see a career of different shifts and in different ways. But one of those things will be not always working full time. And we're already seeing this enormous shift in retirement. It's not, I think we exaggerate too much the impact of raising the state pension age, because many people who enjoy their work and who are in good health, and that tends to be people with higher education, higher income, are just happily working for longer. You know, they want to. Engagement is really key for a sense of self-worth, responsibility, and it even supports you living for longer. So, you know, that I think is a really, really big shift. But we're then foreseeing that not everyone is retiring at the same age. Retirement is no longer a binary outcome of retirement, non-retirement. It becomes a little bit more flexible rather than discrete. And for me, if the 20th century, you know, as life expectancy increased, we saw a lot of leisure happen after retirement. I think probably what we're going to see with these longer lives in the 21st century is as the retirement age rises, to the extent there is a retirement age, we're going to take more leisure this side of retirement, which is working flexibly, working part-time. It could be a 4-day week, a 2-day week. And I think that's particularly appealing to older workers. I did some work recently with Nikolai Morbach and Darren Asimoglu from IT, and older people in particular value flexible work and autonomous work. And actually, the employment market is getting much more supportive.
I would say that idea of essentially optionality and flexibility is now up and down the age column. The younger people that I know, that is probably their primary value.
Totally. I mean, it's interesting. So there's some work on this, and you know, if we look at what defines an age-friendly job, and we built on the research and did some data work here, it's things that everyone likes. So you find flexible working, autonomy, less physically demanding work, all those things are important. But what is interesting, although everyone likes them, older people like them all the more than other ages.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things we found was that the labor market's become a lot more age friendly in the sense there's a lot more jobs with those characteristics. But actually, only about half of those age friendly jobs have actually gone to older workers because graduates like them, younger females like them. So, not all of those age friendly jobs have actually gone to older people.
Yeah. I have this other idea that I want to run by you, which is that we hear a lot about these, and I've had a lot of people on the show talk about health span or perhaps lifespan extension technologies. And at the moment, some of these are rather exotic and expensive. But if we look back at access to, say, antibiotics or other forms of medicine, they quickly it became a societal mandate to do this. And my personal feeling is that and I would love for you to dispute this, is that there's Jeff Bezos and that sort of stuff going on now, but that because there's an economic imperative for these technologies to be up and down the income ladder. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I just been actually trying to think about this and write something on it for the next book. And one level, I think it's great. I think if billionaires are happy to subsidize this research, and they seem very interested for numerous reasons in doing so, some I'm sure are self-interested in terms of their own lives, making large amounts of money, but also just changing the world and doing good for everyone. That's all great. And I'm sure there will be products and developments that happen from this. I don't know when. I'm too smart a forecaster to give you numbers and dates, but something will happen. But I also think that there's also a problem, because I think there's a lot of things we could do now that don't require $1 billion of investment.
Yeah.
And I think there may be things like stem cell research, which looks enormously promising, but I think that's going to take a long while to become cheaper. So I think we do need governments to step up more and say, great, the billionaires are doing that, we can learn from that, but actually we're going to put a load of money into trying to find some cheap things that can be benefit of many, many people and that can add 2 or 3 years of healthy life to where we are right now. That's why I think, for instance, the work Nir Barzilai is doing on metformin is very interesting. Now, whether metformin is or isn't this sort of wonder drug, what's nice about it is it's very cheap. You could take it every day. And if it did work, it would be kind of like a statin, or aspirin. It would be something that bestowed a long-term benefit at a cheap cost. And I think that's a really important place to begin. So I love the exciting pioneering research. I think that's great. But it will be biased, I think, towards those with the income and the resources. But I think there's loads of things we can do now to improve healthy life expectancy that may be hard, but not scientific hard, like the food we eat, like the air we breathe, and then plus things like potentially metformin.
I see in the research we've done a couple of frictions. You're an economist, so everybody is doing a cost benefit analysis, and so they go into the grocery store and they say, "Oh, there's broccoli over here. There are potato chips over here. I'm not really sure that the cost of me, because I don't like eating broccoli, is really going to benefit me. It may not have any impact. I'm going for the potato chips because I know that works."
Yeah.
How does one? It's a belief system. How does one affect that?
No, I think so. It's a really key thing. So I've done some work recently, published in Nature Aging with Martin Ellison from Oxford University and David Sinclair from Harvard Medical School, and it was trying to use economic tools to put a value on aging well. And we all know, in some sense, we know the answer. It's incredibly important, but we were pretty impressed with the numbers that came out. Our calculations suggest that if the US could age better, so you maintained your health for better, in a way that added just 1 year to life expectancy by aging more slowly, it's worth something like $50 trillion to us in terms of welfare, not GDP, just in terms of how we value the game, staggering amounts of money, which would suggest we should be prepared to pay a lot for the broccoli rather than the potato chips. But my goodness, that's a hard decision, isn't it? So I think then the question is, how do we change that? And some of that is about awareness. And I don't, by saying that, I really don't mean to trivialize it. It's incredibly hard to raise awareness. There's a concept of longevity literacy that's doing the rounds that says, if I'm aware I'm going to live a long time, then I better make decisions today. But I think that is one of the challenges of dealing with longevity. We are not, as humans, hardwired to think long term. Just as humans through evolution have never been hardwired to age well, neither are we well inclined to think in longer term. So we have to develop that. And, patience is a bit like any sort of muscle. It's a mental muscle, but it's still a muscle. You have to exercise it and develop it. But my goodness, it's hard. Then, of course, there's all sorts of things we can do which may require, nudges, regulation, obesity taxes. I mean, there's a whole raft of issues here. But I do think we need to look at what is the relationship between what we eat and our health system and our health, because right now there doesn't seem a great connection between either of them.
As someone who's spent considerable time in hospitals, I can tell you there isn't.
Yeah. Well, as the film Airplane says, hospital is a place full of sick people. It's
they seem to be interested in keeping them sick.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an economic incentive there.
Yeah, totally.
Paul Irving, who's runs the Milken Center for, you probably know Paul. Paul told me that the greatest increase in health span, lifespan, I want to say the last 50 years, was around cessation of tobacco use. So that was a big belief system change that was quite effective.
And if you think about it, it was a belief system, but there was also enormous levels of taxation, restrictions on advertising, restrictions on point of sale. I mean, really major changes. So the implications of that in terms of how we tackle what we eat and obesity are pretty striking.
There are, I would personally like to see, there's this drink that they sell in the supermarkets here called Mountain Dew. It's tremendous amounts of fructose and some flavoring and water, which just has horrific consequences to drinks. That we're even allowed to sell this stuff. I don't get it.
But it is going to be a challenge. And of course, there's two challenges. How do we get everyone to better internalize those choices? And that's a huge ask.
Yes.
But also, of course, cheap food is a great thing for people on low income. So how we actually solve that problem, I think, is also huge. Because there's a real correlation. If you want to eat non-processed food and which a variety of vegetables, which is good for the gut, etc., you need time and you need money.
Yeah, and I can see some of the personal freedom people really like, I want my Mountain Dew and hot dogs. Okay.
Yeah. And you can still buy cigarettes and you can still buy alcohol. So you mentioned 80-20. 80-20 rule, I think, is also quite a good one on nutrition. I mean, it's sort of, if 80% of the time you can be in a good place and 20% of the time less a good place, then overall that may be fine. But if you're 100% in not a good place, that's not good.
I want to bring something up that I think is a little controversial, which is this idea of capital. Capital compounding growth over time, and this sort of age power disparity that causes. So to older people, people with, if you have a house, it's compounding in value. You get tax benefits from that. If you own stocks of some kind, they're compounding. If you're a younger person, you don't. And if we're taking life expectancies longer, this age, give me some pushback on this, please, Andrew, but I'm thinking the age power disparity gets worse.
No, I think it's a real problem. And I think it's a complicated one because lots of different things to unravel. So one is, so one way to sort of not worry about it is to say, well, actually, we got this change happening, and people used to think you'd live to 60 or 70, and now we're living to 80 or 90. And so things change. So when you're 20, you don't buy a house as early as you used to because you're still learning about yourself. You haven't committed to a relationship. You've still got other things to do. So you marry later, you start your career later, you buy a house. So you just have debt for longer, but that's fine because you're working for longer. And then you get the house later and everything's fine. But it all just happens later. And so in that world where all that's happening is that everyone's adapting to living longer, younger people have fewer assets, older people have more assets, but the young will become old. And so it kind of all washes out because eventually, the big change is the young becomes old. So you now become one of those later on. So that's one way not to worry about it. But then I think you've got to build a few other things on top of it, which is I think the young coming along now, those behind, let's say, Gen X, to use that horrible generational label, they're the first group who are coming along after a generation who are just hanging around for longer. They hang around for longer in politics, they hang around longer in work, and hang around longer in the housing market. And so that's a disadvantage they face. And so we already know they're going to have to sort of contribute to the gap in social security funding. They're going to pay higher taxes. But this adjustment, they're the first ones having to come along behind it. And that's a problem. I think we really have to think about this because one of my worries about when we talk about an aging society, we always think about older people. Mm. But if the thing that's really happened is the young will become the old, we have to think about everyone. And really, there shouldn't be generational conflict in a world where the young now become the old because we should understand each other much better. But we got these political problems. Then the third thing, which is different from those previous two, like it's just stretching the life course. I'm following after a generation who are living for longer. I give there, for instance, the example in the UK of Prince Charles becoming King Charles, but only the age of 73. I mean, he had to wait so long to be able to take that. But then the third thing is that an older generation become a gerontocracy. And they say, hey, I've got this power. I'm going to use it to benefit me. That then becomes unfortunate. And we've got to really guard against that. And I think I can see that in a number of different areas. So in adapting to longer lives, we've got to make sure we may have to change some rules. So what is interesting in the United States is you do have older leaders. I think, Biden was 76 in the last election. Trump was 73. That's kind of old. Now, I don't want to beat up about having old politicians because if you look at the number of 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds in the US Congress and Senate, it's still less than the number of 80 and 90-year-olds in the population. So we've got to have all voices being listened to. But what is interesting is the US has a tendency to growing at the moment towards older politicians. Europe doesn't. Europe's politicians are actually becoming younger. So the question is, why is that? Is there something about a two-party system? Is it something to do with the need to raise funds to run for president? But what is it that's leading to that bias in the US? And perhaps we might need to change some of the rules to ensure that we don't just have a bias towards older leaders. I no problems with older leaders, but you don't have a bias only towards them. So I think there are some changes that are required. I can also see in the labour market changes. Because actually the labour market's working out very well for some older workers. University professors is probably one of them. They're healthy for a long while, they've got tenure, they can carry on working for ages. But that's tough for those coming through at the bottom. So we need to tweak some of our institutions to make sure we get this intergenerational equality. And I don't mean that to take a pop at boomers or to say older people are selfish. Older, younger people, they're probably no more selfish than one another. Some are, some aren't. But we do need to be careful of these big societal shifts that are happening that we've never seen before in human history. And we haven't designed institutions to get the best out of it.
Thank you for bringing all that up. It does. As you were saying that, I did recall, the European leaders, some of them are in their 30s and 40s, which are...
Well, the Finnish one got in trouble for going for a nightclub recently.
Yeah.
35, I guess.
I love her.
Yeah.
She's great.
Yeah.
But then in the US, it's different. And I think that in the US, economic power equates to political power. And I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing here is a reinforcing of this happening. But I'm not a politician. I don't know much about
Well,
politics, but that's what I see happening.
I mean, one way I think you could try and get rid of some of these issues is to have term limits, which of course the US has at a presidential level. And that's not an age limit, that's just a term limit. And I think, I know there've been suggestions recently of a sort of mental adequacy test for politicians above a certain age. That I think is wrong. I mean, if you're going to have a mental adequacy test, just do it for anyone of any age. And it seems a relatively good idea that whoever becomes president should be in reasonable health and mentally capable. But hopefully the electoral process sorts that out. But to target it just at a certain age category, I think is wrong.
Agreed. That's ageism.
Yeah.
One of the fabulous things that I love about the earlier book that you wrote was this idea of assets. I love this. This is my favorite part of the book. Good. Is that when people think of assets, they immediately go for the, how much money's in the bank, how much is my house worth? Yeah. That's one of maybe 15 assets that you have. Yeah. And how these, the value of your productive assets, your network assets, your health is an asset. And people don't think of it that way. I mean, they would think if you have a health issue, that's clearly an anti-asset, but they don't think of health as an asset, and it's not approached that way. I think that's brilliant.
Thank you. I mean, and for me, I think that is the heart of that book, because what that book says. Okay, we're living for longer, and if you extrapolate these trends, the young today have a reasonable chance of living to 100. How do you manage that? And as an economist, I sort of think about it in terms of assets. So what's an asset? It's something that you can build up over time that provides a flow of benefits over many periods. So it's not just something you eat today, for instance. And you can invest and build it up, but if you don't, it diminishes and depreciates. And as you say, we always think about finances. And, one of the things when I used to teach this stuff, particularly to executive education, so sort of people not doing degree, but come visiting us for short courses from companies, is I'd sort of say, here's the life expectancy trends. And there was always a group, often sort of mid-50-year-old men who would just go, oh, shit. And you think, I just told you probably living for longer than you thought. And you just sort of said, that's bad news. And it's exactly this, which is, I just got to keep working for longer. And again, that's a problem with governments. They just keep raising the state pension age. And although that solves the financial problem, it doesn't really lead to a good life. So the question is, how do I think about my broad portfolio? What should I be investing in? And so in the 100-Year Life, we identify 4 different assets. One is your finances. And sure, money matters. Of course it does. But you don't want your money to drive your life. You'd rather your finances support the life that you want, if you can do. So, yeah, you're going to have to work for longer. But there's these 3 other assets that are important. The first you mentioned is productive assets, which is your skills and knowledge. And if you're going to work for long, if you're going to be working in your 70s, you better make sure you've got the skills and knowledge to do that. What can you learn at 20 that's still going to be relevant in 50 years' time? So updating your skills and knowledge is really important. Then there was your vitality assets. And that's of 2 types. There's your mental and physical health. And then there's your friends and relationships. And of course, study after study about what makes for a good life tells us it's relationships. It's, the capacity to love and be loved. So you've got to invest in those. You can't buy a lifelong friend at 80. You can't buy a good relationship with your children at any age, possibly, but it's certainly not in later life. So you've got to work on this all the way. And then we said there's this thing called transformational assets, which haven't tended to be very important in the past. But as life gets longer, you need it because it's your ability to deal with change and to transition, because you'll see more shifts over your career, more changes in your life as life gets longer. And the key thing about those 4 assets, your finances, your productive assets, your vitality assets, and your transformational assets, is, think of a dashboard with a sort of a dial on them, like a gas dial. You don't want any of them to go on the red, because then you've got a problem. If you run out of money, run out of health, run out of relationships, run out of ability to change, you've got a bad life. So you've got to keep investing in them. But I can't think of a single job that enables you to invest in all 4 of them at the same time. If you're building it in money, work hard, intense job, stress, but I've got my finances, but it's not doing your health and your relationships any good. So that's where we got the concept of the multi-stage life, because it's very hard to build up all those assets, but you've got to build up all four to cope with this longer life.
That's right. I want to say I've bought your book, and it's mandatory for anyone who works in my company to read this book, no matter what age they are, to
Brilliant.
understand this. Yeah.
No, it's amazing the impact that book has had on people. For most of my career as an economist, I've been speaking about what's going to happen to the Fed funds rate or the Chinese renminbi. But with this book, people come up to me and say, "I've read your book and it's changed my life," which at first I would find rather terrifying, because no one ever did that when I talked about the Fed funds rate. But it's something I got a bit more used to now, and it's great because I'm not saying I've got answers, but we need to think about these questions, and if that framework helps, that's wonderful.
Are you able to give us a peek into what you're working on now?
Yes, I'm doing a number of things. So, for me, I think one really important thing to do is to change the narrative to sort of be more positive. And of course, the 100-Year Life was like that. It's not that I want to be Pollyannish and say, "Oh, isn't everything about old age great?" But similarly, if we only focus on the dismal negative things, then we're never going to invest in our future, and we don't realize this real change. So I'm very much trying to change the narrative, and I'm doing that in a number of ways. One is this book that I'm literally finishing in a couple of days, which would be called Evergreen, I think. And it just says, for the first time ever, the young and middle age can expect to become the very old. And we have to invest much more in our future. And that's not about wheelchairs and walkers and care homes. It's about all of life. And it has radical changes for the health system, education, everything. So it's there's that. And I hope that'll help to raise awareness of these trends. Then I'm also trying to get governments and firms to do something, because I think what's really interesting in this space is that more and more people are waking up to it. And I find myself spending more and more time at conferences and events where the same things are being said. We've got to do something. So let's try and do it. So at the business school, I teach a course called The Business of Longevity, which is trying to get a next generation of business leaders to recognize the business potential in helping us come up with new products and services that help us age well, including the food industry and many others, the pharma sector, because business will be key for change. And then I'm trying to get governments to wake up to this agenda, and beginning to happen. I'm seeing in Japan, in Singapore, even in the UK, a little bit the US. Politicians go, "Oh, wow, you mean I could turn this bad news story into a good news story? You mean I can get more GDP out of it?" So I'm trying to sort of get the economics area more interested in this notion that actually, rather than aging be just a negative thing, there's a positive potential. So in my kind of popular writing and talks and in my academic work, that's really what I'm trying to do.
That's brilliant. Andrew, is there anything you want to leave us with today?
No, I just think, I say, we have to, whether longevity is quite the right word, I think it's a better alternative to think about aging. We're very, very confused about the word aging. And aging takes us into, I think, very odd spaces. But for me, the key thing to recognize is these longevity trends are such that whatever your age, you have more time ahead of you than anyone previous of your age. And that should be a good thing. But of course, it comes with a responsibility to invest in that future. So I wish everyone the best of luck in investing in that future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. I know you're a busy guy, and it's just a real pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you, David, and enjoy the chat, and thank you for the good, nice words about the book.
Thank you, Andrew. Wow, what a conversation. I love having super smart people on the show. Really, it's such a delight. It is one of the great things of doing, what we do here is I get every week to talk to somebody who's, a professor of economics at the London School of Business. Kind of awesome. Let's get to Just Try This. This is the little thing that we do at the end of the show that, may just help you live a little longer, a little happier. So this week on Just Try This, my suggestion is the next time you go to the grocery store, go over to the produce section and look around for something that maybe you've never eaten before, or maybe it's been a long time since you've eaten it, and just grab it, put it in your basket. And then when you get home, whatever it is, I don't know, Belgian artichokes or whatever. I don't know if there is such a thing as a Belgian artichoke, but, see if you can cook it. Because I think one of the things that happens, with age is not only we tend to narrow the people that we hang out, the stuff that we do, we also sort of like narrow the way we eat and the kind of foods we eat. And, there's a really simple solution to that. Grab a novel fruit or vegetable, take it home, find out what it is, and just try and cook it. So let's try that this week. I tried, I did a really interesting thing this week with this rainbow chard with like garlic salt and steamed it with some olive oil. And it actually worked out great. It was really yum. So this week, try this. Go to the grocery store, get something new, bring it home, figure out how to cook it. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We really appreciate your time and your attention. And hey, this is where you get to, guess what? Leave us up to a 5-star review wherever you listen to this show. Have you done that yet? Because we would really appreciate this. And, maybe there's somebody out there that you think could enjoy the show. Why don't you just send them the link and, maybe you can help them out. Next week, we've got another amazing, super smart person. I just love talking to smart people. Next week, we've got the original Futurecaster, Faith Popcorn, and we're going to talk about the future of aging and what that's going to be like. I can't wait for that. And so everyone, have a wonderful week. If there's some reason that you would like to contact me directly, questions, comments, you just feel like reaching out to me, David@superage.com. Until then, have a great week. Take care now.